We got a few folks coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you for joining us for the Analyst panel. We've got some really great and well-known and esteemed analysts joining us here today. And we're going to do a bit of a free form, a couple of questions up front. We'll leave some time at the end if there's anything on your mind. But as we get started, what I'm going to do is, so that I don't do it any injustice, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Brian Hopkins. I'm a Vice President and Principal Analyst for Forrester Research, covering big data and advanced analytics.
Welcome. Bear, and I'm Principal Analyst with OVM, and I cover big data and analytics.
My name is Jim Curtis. I'm a Senior Analyst at 451. I cover what I sometimes call the data layer. I cover Hadoop, various technologies, NoSQL, a lot of the analytical databases.
Great. Well, thanks, and thanks again for taking the time with us today. The first one I wanted to tee up for discussion is cloud computing, right? So obviously cloud computing, there's a lot of buzz in the industry. It's obviously a big deal that's impacting us. What are you seeing in and around cloud and analytics and big data this year?
That's a very timely question. I just finished a research report. I haven't published it yet, called Move Your Big Data to the Cloud. And I just wrote the blog for it, so it should go live this week. And the name of the blog is, For Big Data, Go Public, Cloud, or Go Home. And what that really means is I've been interviewing a lot of companies, many of which don't want to make their name known, because what they're telling me is we have a public cloud first policy, and that's the key to our competitive advantage. We know how to do it, we learned how to do it, and we're going to clobber our competitors. So if you think about big data and the public cloud coming together, it's really an exponential effect. You can think about Moore's law, right? Google is committed to reducing cloud infrastructure prices at a Moore's law philosophy. So prices are going down. Power for analytics and processing speed should double about every 18 months to 2 years. And companies that are building architectures in the cloud that can absorb innovations like serverless, managed services, function as a service things, are going to be able to, first, not have to worry about upgrades. And second, they're going to be able to innovate at a pace that the companies that are worried about Spark upgrades and Hadoop upgrades simply aren't going to be able to do. And while right now that seems like, well, okay, they can move a little bit faster, if you think about moving at an exponential pace, after a couple of doubling cycles, it's going to be a landslide. And the companies that are stuck on premise or stuck with huge hybrid implementations are going to be futzing around with all kinds of stuff that the people who are in the cloud are not going to be futzing with. They're going to be delivering value. And that's really an extinction level event for companies, I think.
Go public or go home. Thanks.
Yeah.
Tony?
I guess I'll go home. No.
Is your mic on?
I thought it was on.
Is it in your pocket?
No, I guess it must have slipped down. But anyway, I see cloud as basically being the key to getting to the other 99% of enterprises that have been looking at this idea of big data and have been very concerned about the complexity. And they take a look at Hadoop and they see all the zoo animals, and they say, I don't have, do I have any Hadoop? I can't find any Hadoop programmers. I can't find any Spark programmers. Or if I can, I can't afford them. And the thing is that, and the other problem also is that being as a very rapidly evolving platform, can I keep up? Am I going to get fatigued from trying to constantly upgrade with all these new projects, and how to sort through all this stuff? And so I really see cloud as being really the great simplifier, the great packager, the great bundler of big data services. We're probably not even going to call it Hadoop. I mean, this conference has already been renamed. Right, exactly. And Hortonworks is, and basically, and Hortonworks is not alone. I mean, Hortonworks, Cloud Air, MapR, they are all basically saying we're not just Hadoop companies anymore. And so basically, what I see the future, and I think a good example of this is what you folks have done with Hortonworks Data Cloud, is that you start to package some fit-for-purpose services. So I don't have to worry about which modules, which pieces I'm going to have to put together. It's like these are already prescribed. It's a good starting point. And it's probably like, it's the 80-20 rule. It's just that you can get 20% of the functionality. It'll probably satisfy 80% of the audience out there, or take care of 80% of the jobs. So I really see cloud as being essentially the growth vector for big data. Essentially, I just don't see that, that companies that are not early adopters or pioneers are going to be able to really take advantage of this without the simplification that the cloud offers.
Yeah, I see a lot of same things as my colleagues. I wrote a pretty big, I guess, a 3-part series earlier this year, really that sort of documented like kind of what's going on in this big data space as far as cloud goes. And at one extreme, you have vendors or individuals that want to get onto the cloud, and it's more of like a infrastructure as a service play, and they drop it on there. And as you sort of move towards sort of a 45-degree angle towards the right corner, the responsibilities shift between the parties, right? To where the individuals who wants to be in the cloud is just worrying about their job, right? And the provider is providing like entirely all of the services, and it's completely abstracted, right? So amongst those two extremes is what's sort of out there in the market. So I guess as Tony and as Brian said, there's these options out there, and as organizations want to come on, they have options to do this. I believe that the trend is probably going to head towards people want to do less of the work, and they want to sort of put that on to the provider. They want more services, they want to blend things. They'll probably already have data in the cloud, and it might be easier to do that. And as we'll get into, there's the number of, several advantages to sort of being in the cloud. While it's not for everybody, there are several things to do it. So, I mean, these are some of the things we're seeing.
There's actually, just playing off that. Is my mic on? Can you hear me? Okay. There's a right way and a wrong way to do this, right? It's a really interesting dynamic, because in the past, if you weren't a first mover, you were kind of smoked. But I'm doing inquiries with a lot of our clients who have kind of not jumped in the big data pool. And I'm like, okay, well now if you jump in the big data pool and you jump into the cloud, you can have everything that all these other firms invested millions in years in like an hour, right? So, I mean, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So, for example, 2 companies I'm working with, I'm going to have to be a little vague here, but one company had a Hadoop install where they listened to a particular Hadoop vendor, we won't say who. They installed Hadoop as infrastructure as a service on a cloud vendor, we won't say who. And then they wrote a bunch of Spark jobs to move data from the cloud object store into Hadoop to do SQL on Hadoop using pick your flavor. And I was talking to them and I said, okay, so are you experimenting with Amazon Athena for SQL access to raw data that you're loading right into your, well, I gave out the cloud vendor. Are you experimenting with these functions as a service, right? Are you doing this? And like, no, well, we're in this 3-year deal and we're in an older version of Spark and we're writing all these Spark jobs and we really can't do that easily. On the other hand, another vendor who has kind of avoided getting into Hadoop up until now, but has spent the time to load the data into the cloud object store, index that data, knows what's there, now was able to, within a week, use a SQL serverless innovation from the vendor to start exploring contact center data, like in a week. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, look, if you're not positioned to move that fast, and you're worrying about what this other vendor is worrying about, you're going to get smoked.
Yeah. No,
you can't competitively keep up.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely the agility factor, the speed and agility factor there. I think probably for a number of organizations, I think there's going to be a question, obviously, about, can we put this data in the cloud? And the thing is, this is an area where basically we're legal mandates and corporate policies have not really caught up to this. And of course, now we have the added complications of GDPR.
Yeah.
And so I think that is probably going to be the biggest, I would say, short term, the biggest obstacle towards cloud migration.
Yeah.
The irony of all this is that the traditional question was basically, can we trust our data? Is the cloud secure enough?
Oh yeah.
I think we're kind of going through a 180 right now, which is that given the rapid morphing of threats, can an ordinary IT organization
can't afford it.
Basically keep up with that? We'll have the same expertise as say like an Amazon or an Azure or a Google Cloud's going to have. So there is a little. So I mean, on one hand, you've got basically these corporate policy and regulatory mandates versus the reality of how do we basically keep ahead of the bad guys.
And I'm talking to companies in Europe. They're really taking against GDPR this whole idea of don't be. It's like if a bear is chasing 2 people. You just don't have to be the slowest one, right? So they just don't want to be in the back. So they realize that the GDPR is going to be unenforceable in whole, and so they just don't want to be the ones caught with their pants down. And I think that dynamic is going to lead to more people experimenting with what you can do.
Yeah.
And once we get past 2018, I think you'll see a lot of change.
Well, I mean, a lot of people I talk to, so the thing is that there's organizations out there that might be yours that have largely operated on-prem, right? And cloud has been picking up. We tracked that it's probably 12, 16, 18 months into this, right? Where it's sort of a hockey stick thing now going on.
Right.
But most of the time organizations, they actually want to get in the cloud, but it's actually some challenge to get there. And so a lot of them, I mean, some of the research we've done is I would say half of them say, at this point going forward, I'm going to do everything net new into the cloud, right? And I'm going to spin up new applications if the applications change to do it, and then I will slowly bring the other things along with me. And the converse is that startups and things that sort of come on board right now are like, we're going to be cloud only. Right. And it's kind of an interesting bifurcation of how people are sort of segmenting them in the market. I don't know if you guys are seeing similar things.
Well, I mean, what I am seeing is, when you talk to larger enterprises that are doing this, they're like, look, we understand that software is differentiating. We understand that the biggest companies in the world right now have differentiated themselves in software and data, and they all do it in the cloud. So therefore, that's our growth engine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also, I think, for a lot of companies, like, are you ready to basically try and compete for that leadership? And so I think there are a lot of organizations that are, I mean, it's sort of, it's another sort of dichotomy here, or another paradox, which is on one hand, I see the cloud as being a great simplifier, but on the other, it's that there are a lot of organizations that are like, well, how do I actually do this, other than I just basically, take out a subscription to Salesforce in the cloud or something like that, doing something like
that's a lot of learning.
A clean break.
Which is why the companies that have figured this out think it's a competitive advantage for them, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No question.
So it sounds like we have general consensus. There was no fight. Go public or
We're
go
trying
home.
to make a fight.
We're still here.
Next
right?
question.
Well, I'm going home tomorrow.
Okay. Being second is okay, but don't be last. The bear will eat you.
Yeah.
All right. That was my takeaway. Anything else? Good.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one, artificial intelligence and machine learning, deep learning, data science, certainly getting a lot of hype in the marketplace, notwithstanding this morning's opening keynote session as well. There are some out there saying that it's like the most hyped thing ever, right? What are you seeing, hearing, and the advice do you have for folks who are thinking about how they get their feet wet in the AI, machine learning, and deep learning space?
Wow.
That's an easy question.
Yeah. I heard Chuck Norris was doing machine learning anyway. So, no, it's, it's interesting. I mean, hype tends to have sort of a negative connotation to it. One of my colleagues did a report not too long ago where we went through, and 451 is known for, we do a lot of short reports, 1,000 short reports during the year. And so we did some basic analysis on that of when we started mentioning machine learning in some of our reports. And 2002, it was starting to show up, although that term had been around for many years, but it started to show up. And then it was probably about 2013 or so, and right around there, we're just kind of a hockey stick up. And I guess that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think the hype is when people make exaggerated claims, or they sort of attribute things the machine learning is going to do for them that are sort of like beyond reality, right? That's where I think kind of the hype kind of kicks in. But organizations are chatting about this, talking about it. They're very interested in it, concerned about it. There is, how do I get to point A to point B? And that's where I see a lot of the talk. So I think the talk is fine. We take a lot of inquiries on it. It's not, the machine learning space is not my day-to-day responsibilities, although it touches my area. But I think the chatter and the talk is fine, and I think it's actually driving a lot of the market.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because in a way, I remember, of course, there was the well-quoted HBR article about data scientists being the sexiest job of the 21st century. Now, as the machine, and within a couple of years, as machine learning, displaced that. I do tend to get a little bit scared when basically when you see a tech term becomes basically something that you see on a front cover of of a popular magazine or TV program.
When you started seeing big data commercials on TV.
Yeah, that kind of, I thought, okay, time to leave, get a new job. But so I mean, yes, there's going to naturally, when you get such mass hype like that, it's going to lead to lots of like, well, are robots going to take over the world? And which is entertaining. It's good for basically getting lots of page views and that type of thing. The reality is a lot more mundane, which is that essentially the reason why I think that we see machine learning and with elevated interest amongst our clients, Ovum clients, but in general is that one, the data is there. Two, the processing power is there. The cloud is obviously a key contributor to it in terms of you can harness this stuff.
Yeah.
The key to machine learning, I mean, actually, is not so much the models as much as you need to have enough data, sufficient data, and the right data to basically conduct and to get any type of meaningful learning, to get a large enough sample.
Ongoing, yeah.
Exactly.
So.
And so those factors are there. Our take is that one, you will be seeing, in large enterprises that can afford, very highly skilled specialists, you will see definitely an uptick in use of frameworks like TensorFlow or some of the more accessible ones, through Spark. But on the other hand, I think the biggest kick though from machine learning is really going to be packaged in applications where it's going to be bundled in under the hood. I mean, you're all on your phone. A lot of your for instance, like Siri or let's say your Amazon Echo Dot, it is already using machine learning, already using artificial intelligence. You're already seeing that in consumer products, and you're going to see the same thing with enterprise software. I think in terms of quantity, that's where most of the benefit's going to come. But obviously, where the headlines are going to come, and where you have these very brilliant people, at the Googles of the world that are actually working with this.
Right. So when I take this question all the time, and everyone, I think it's really important to kind of understand what changed, right? And so, like Tony said, machine learning is already everywhere in everything we do, and it's not really all that, the basics of it aren't really all that new, many years, right? So what is different today, and why are we paying attention to it now? Well, I think you could trace it back to the dot-com era, when the likes of Amazon and Facebook, once they came along, started building business models around predictive analytic models that didn't have to be 70 or 80% right. I mean, Capital One built a business around credit scoring. It kind of pioneered that, but you had to be pretty good with the credit score to make good business decisions about who gets the and not. The kinds of models you need to do credit predictions don't get much better when you shove more data into them. They kind of peak. So they're not really big data problems. You could do it with small data sets, which is good because that's all companies had at the time. Well, now along comes Amazon and says, hey, we don't have to be as right as the credit card companies. All we got to be is 30% right or 20% right. That we give you a book you're going to buy, and that's profitable for us. So they demonstrated how these models worked, and then because they were making money, they and other folks like them started investing, the Googles of the world, started investing in how do we make these models better. And then they came up with us a whole new class of algorithms, and oh, by the way, the more data we shove into these algorithms, the better they get. They don't peak out, right? And then that has led to kind of what's really interesting right now is what's happening in this whole deep learning thing. Where, I don't know, you guys know AlphaGo, right? AlphaGo is Google, and they beat the Go Master. Well, I didn't know this. I found this out. There was one move in one of the matches, the third match, I think, where AlphaGo made a move. Apparently, Go people catalog every different kind of move. So there's books written on this stuff. So it's hard to make a move in Go that someone hasn't written about 1,000 years ago and said this is what you should do. Apparently, they made a move that no one had ever seen before, ever. Now, how did it make that move? Well, it made that move because the way these algorithms work, a bunch of little neurons feeding outputs into each other take on behaviors that are unpredictable and we don't really understand. And those behaviors start to kind of look like human intuition, which is really interesting. But we're like at the very early days. We're like back when IBM Deep Blue beat Spassky. And look how many years it took before we were really able to take what IBM did there and they turned it into something else, right? Well, that's where we are with this. We've got a long way to go, but we're kind of at that tipping point where we're not sure why these things are doing what they're doing, but they're doing them in such a way that it's really interesting and different, and ergo, all the interest in these. But I know I'm going along, two things that are going on. Number one, there's a big trend, like you said, of machine learning proliferating into everything we do. So it's hard to buy an analytics tool today that doesn't have something going on with that. And so we're seeing that widespread adoption of the stuff that we already understand. And we're kind of mixing it with this whole idea that there's stuff that we don't understand coming, but the services around it are very nascent right now.
Yeah.
So these two things are going to have to play out for a
Where
while.
you see the deep learning is things like, basically image recognition or text or speech translation. I mean, there's definitely, definitely a need for that, definitely a practical need. But I think actually machine learning itself is not a monolithic thing. There are many different forms of it, and starting at the shallow end of the pool, which is basically doing a lot of very smart pattern matching, towards the deeper end of the pool, where you're basically getting into the more of the the cognitive, the deep learning. So I mean, like, I think there are going to be different maturity curves for for each of those forms. And for instance, at this point, I think it's going to be a while. I mean, obviously, deep learning is good for like image recognition. I think it's going to be a bit of a while before it becomes practical for, say, business applications or predictive analytics. Of course, the IBM Watson folks may beg to differ there. But the thing is, closer, in where you're doing clustering, random forest, basically, path analysis. That's real. I'm not going to say it's simple, but compared to deep learning, it's a much more simply defined problem.
Right. Yeah, just one other thing on that is that it is. I mean, machine learning is already in part of our lives, right? If we have an Alexa or some kind of thing in our home, it's showing up. It's in a lot of maybe data prep tools and filtering tool, right? It sort of sometimes they call it smarts. This has some intelligence in it. It'll do it. So it's part of things that we deal with. A lot of the people I sort of interact with and talk with is like, well, I understand it's in these products, but I want to sort of use it internally, right? And so that's when that's where things like getting on skill sets and having enough data, right? People say, well, how much data do you have? Well, I got this. I'm like, well, that may not be enough, right? So where are you going to get that data, right? So these are all things, some of the barriers and challenges that sort of exist out there. But there's a couple things. You can do a DIY approach, right, where you can, I'm going to get some smart people above my pay grade that'll sort of do it, or I can, sort of maybe do buy a platform or a tool that will sort of help me get there. So there's ways around there, and its promise is very enticing to organizations, right? So
I'm hearing we're kind of early. Bots are not going to become human beings.
Human beings are not going to become bots.
And human beings are not going to become bots, I don't think.
No.
But then also, it sounds like even consumer electronics may actually drive value for businesses, which is kind of a reverse paradigm. Right?
Well, consumer technology has been leading for a long time.
There you go. Very good. All right. So the last prepared question, and this is the one that I'm most excited about because we've not rehearsed this, is we're going to ask the analysts what they each think is kind of the next big thing that we in this business and market need to think about or that's going to impact us. Maybe we'll start in the middle this time.
Okay, well, this is going to reflect a lot of my parochial interests, which is I really follow data platforms. I mean, look, we've spoken about the big things, which is basically machine learning and cloud, and there's no question that those are going to become very basically central forces in driving the next wave of innovation. But getting beyond that, what really fascinates me is that if you looked at databases and say like and I don't think you'll argue with this one, if we looked at say like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, say like there's really not a lot new under the sun. We basically have invented it. And what you're finding with cloud is it really it throws new questions or new assumptions into a database architecture. So for instance, do we always need absolute ACID consistency? Or are there different levels of consistency? I mean, look at what Microsoft has just introduced with Cosmos DB. Look at what Google has just introduced with Cloud Spanner, which is a transactional database that can go to like tens of billions of rows, and I might be even underestimating it there. Or you look at what Amazon has done with Aurora, which is basically taken a more conventional open source databases, being MySQL and PostgreSQL, and reimagining them for the cloud, where the idea is that you have this basically this inexhaustible infrastructure. You do not have limitations on replication. It totally changes the way you think about things like disaster recovery. And so, again, these are my own parochial interests, and I said I think definitely the big forces are going to be machine learning and cloud. But when at least in the areas that I'm looking at, when I look at how the cloud is basically helping is reinventing the database, that to me fascinates me.
Right. I think really two things, and they're kind of related to one another. I think the first thing is the really key to success in this is how quickly you can build closed loop systems of insight. That is connections between data, analytics that drive insight, action that's digital so you can measure it, which provides input data that goes around that loop, right? And the thing while I was talking, I can mention this because he talked publicly at Spark Summit last week. I was talking with Matt Fry, who was the chief data scientist for Hotels.com. And what he was telling me, he was saying, look, is he here, by the way? I always got to ask. Because like, I'm here, I didn't say that, no. But no, literally what he said was that the next thing they're looking at is how you build models that can be managed, automate the deployment, management, tuning, and replacement of models. You'll hear a term like hyperparameter tuning, so that's kind of like the new buzzword. How do I create a set of meta-parameters that I can use to tune the parameters of my model so the model can organically train itself and learn without redeployment? Because that's really on the cutting edge of how you build and automate these closed-loop systems of insight. And that's related, and that's like really the cutting edge. All the major vendors right now have their machine learning, Watson machine learning, and Databricks has one, and they're all trying to automate this process of how do I go from building and tuning a model to deploying it, monitoring what it does, and replacing it when it gets out of spec. And that's related to the second thing that I think is coming, which is this whole notion of edge computing. Right? There's an enormous amount of resources out there in gateway servers and on devices that are completely untapped. And so what we see here is a number of vendors. So first off, all the major, like the Dells of the world, are creating gateway servers. Customers are not quite sure what to do with these yet, but they're experimenting with how they push more logic into the gateways that are primarily rules-based. But what's coming with those gateway servers is not rules-based logic for how to filter and pass data up, but machine learning driven, right? And so once we conquer the gateway servers, then that logic will get pushed down into the devices. So like for instance, gpredicts already has a slider-based way to say, well, here's the algorithm, here's the rules. Not algorithm, here's the rules. I'm going to determine where those rules run, sliding them from devices to the edge to the data center, right? And it's pretty advanced in a very limited context, but then you take a look at what Hortonworks is doing around Apache NiFi and their Hortonworks data flow, and how they want to push code and ultimately machine learning models and closed-loop systems of insight to gateway servers in the edge, right? That's what's coming in the next couple of years, and that's going to completely transform the way we have to think about our architecture to be able to do that, because it's certainly not like anything you're doing in your data center right now.
I might take a slightly more pragmatic approach, maybe, I guess.
Man. Show us all.
I'm like, you guys are here for Hadoop, what's going on? I was at IBM when back when we did I guess I can say this, maybe there's IBM people in here. We did a Hadoop appliance. They've since sort of done, have sort of dismissed that. But so a lot of us have been in the Hadoop space for a while. But just kind of watching where things are, right? With Hortonworks' distribution. I mean, we have sort of platforms that have a lot of parts in them, okay? And so I've asked a lot of people, what are you going to bring on a new project in there? And so a lot of, I think, the work going forward is going to be very fine-grained and very fine-tuned in some of these platforms, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing at this conference as well, right? Security is going to get better, governance is going to get better, right? Some of these things, we're going to harden these things. These things are going to get hardened over time. There's also going to be, greater efficiency within moving data around. But within sort of the broader sort of analytic space where sort of Hadoop and some of these technologies are playing, it was kind of interesting to see NVIDIA on stage today. Some of you have been covering, so GPUs are actually kind of a big deal, right? They're coming on. There's been, I would say within the last, I covered the space, there's, at least the last year, has been 5 or 6 probably new database GPU-driven players enter the market. So with lots of funding behind them, doing lots of interesting things. And they're sort of, they're sort of bleeding on to, it's all analytics-driven, SQL, column restores, but they're bleeding on to, there's overlap between, what sort of Hadoop and Spark will do, as well as the data warehouses. So this is going to be an interesting space to sort of see how technologies like find their rightful home in the environment, right? And sort of carve that out. So Just kind of an interesting thing. It was kind of interesting to see them on stage today. But
Yeah. Playing off that, I think, the moves that like IBM and Hortonworks are making to unify security, metadata, and governance, right? Security, metadata, and governance, guys, Brian's opinion, has to be open source. You can't have a vibrant Hadoop ecosystem with a proprietary metadata management tool. Sorry, I don't think you can. So therefore, where's the energy happening around unifying security, metadata, and data policy governance in the open source ecosystem, right? How's that going to play out, right? That's what's going to make open source the center of the universe, or not, if it doesn't.
it's got to be, yeah.
If it doesn't solve that, then you're nowhere.
And what's also interesting about that is with that partnership, IBM is actually driving IBM to actually rethink its approach to basically managing governance in terms of it had, when it still ran its own Hadoop platform, it basically extended a number of its existing, governance tools, security tools, Guardium and the like. And I mean, it was pretty impressive. None of the other Hadoop vendors had anything like that. But what they found through experience is that this top-down approach does not work in an environment that, compared to your enterprise database, is more infinitely scalable, and that you need something that's more distributed from the bottom up. So it's very interesting to see how they're basically looking at Atlas as a way of refactoring the capabilities and through that.
Close your ears for a sec, Scott. Here's the problem with Hadoop vendors today, or the vendors formerly known as Hadoop vendors. I won't call them Hadoop vendors because they don't want to be Hadoop vendors. Okay, yeah, I was paying attention, I know. And we wrote about this in a report I did called The Cloudy Future of Hadoop. Unifying metadata, security, and governance is the biggest threat or the biggest opportunity for Hadoop. You got to have it all working together so you can use Spark and Storm and Kafka and Hadoop all together with kind of in a unified framework. The problem is all the vendors formerly known as Hadoop left in the market all have different strategies. Meanwhile, the cloud vendors, the frenemy cloud vendors, are saying, well, yeah, you can use that or that or that, but you use mine. You don't need it. Yeah. So I'm talking to some vendors who say, look, I don't want to screw with Hadoop because they can't get their act together. I'm going to use Spark and S3, or I'm going to use Microsoft, which is really Hortonworks. But I'm going to use I'm not going to futz with Hadoop because I don't know which one to go down. And so I think it's either the biggest existential threat or the biggest opportunity. Because if the open source community can figure out how to unify metadata, security, and governance around all these tools, it's going to be a very powerful case for continuing to use those tools as we migrate into the cloud.
Yeah, and a real challenge on that one is that we're not going to have any shortage of metadata. We're not going to have any shortage of data lineage data.
Oh my
Every
God,
tool is collecting it, whether it be the data platform, whether it be your security tool, whether it be your BI tool. They're all collecting records on who's done what to this information.
That's why I like the schema registry approach.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
We'll see how that plays out. All right.
Cool. Great. Well, we have like 4 minutes left, I think.
No, we got 6.
We got 6.
7 is for 2:43.
All right. So is there anyone in the
watches.
audience wants to ask? And these are trick questions. I didn't plant them, so if you don't like them,
all right.
Sir.
Hi. What kind of questions? I mean, it's a question about a question. What kind of questions would you have somebody ask of themselves if they were to measure, say, their maturity with respect to big data?
I got a real brief answer to that. How is it going to make your business different? How is your business going to be more competitive because of it? You would be surprised the number of clients I do inquiries with. They come to me, this is our big data strategy, what do you think? First question I say is, how is this going to make your business different? And you know what they always answer? Well, data democratization and lower cost of data will make our business different. I said, bullshit. Tell me how this is going to make a difference in the numbers that your board decides drive the stock price. And they don't know. So you have to focus on that, and so many people don't.
And a lot of it is also basically shiny new thing envy. Like when I've done a lot of tours of our client base, especially when they're going over to Asia Pac, which and the question I always get is, how can I get involved with this? And the first thing I basically tell them, this is actually, take this more from a bottom-up approach, is don't necessarily look inside your company to start, go to some local meetups or work with open data. And start basically just working with what's in the environment out there. I think a problem that we tend to have is that we like the shiny new things. And for instance, a good example of this, I was actually at a talk at it was actually last year at your alma mater at Teradata. A guy he was basically the head of data science for one of the European mobile carriers. And he was telling basically his team, he said, look, I know all you folks want to do machine learning, but do the data science first. Emphasis on the science, which is kind of grunt work in comparison, but you need to get that stuff down first. So I think a key measure, I think at the high level, the measure of maturity is what you're talking about. At the low level, it's basically, are you folks actually applying scientific method and not just running TensorFlow just because it sounds cool and it'll be great on the resume?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting today. They said let's go back to the roots and say what Hadoop is for. I meet a lot of people that say, I stood up a cluster and it failed, and my answer to that was it was probably misaligned somehow. They were either over expecting it to do something that it sort of wasn't designed to do, right? And sort of getting that right, knowing what it will do for you, what your big data deployment will do for you, and not sort of trying to make it a transactional database, or trying to stretch it beyond its limits. Because beginning HDFS, I mean, they still are great. I mean, people still use them. They're very affordable systems to put your data into, and I mean that's still a really good play for people, right? Now they're potentially machine learning build onto that. So these are the kind of things. Just know the limits with it, I guess. So.
Great. There was another hand over here. Anyone else? No? Okay. Up here.
Yeah, just a quick question. Just following up on Brian's comments. So if you think about the world moving to the public cloud, and as vendors or as customers that have been using Hortonworks or Cloudera on premise, as they move to the public cloud, how big of a threat do you think that is for kind of the traditional Hadoop distribution vendors? And is the governance and security really the only limiting factor?
Well, I noticed an interesting thing, Mike Gualtieri and I, when we did the report last year. Oh, yeah, the question that he had was, what kind of a threat is the cloud to the traditional Hadoop vendors? And on one hand it is, and on one hand it isn't. So I know that's a wishy-washy answer, but let me explain. One of the things that we noticed last year, back in 2016, is that the rush to the cloud was much faster for enterprises than we thought. According to a survey, it was the #1 priority for big data in 2016, was using more public cloud. And I think we as an analyst community saw it, and the vendors all saw it as well. So frankly, Hadoop was not designed to run in the cloud initially. HDFS is being replaced by cloud object stores. So what's really left of core Hadoop? Mostly Yarn, and Yarn has competitors in the cloud, right? So what is Hadoop's place in the cloud is kind of a big deal for Hadoop vendors. So they're all trying to come up with their story of why they're relevant in the cloud, and each one has a strategy that you have to carefully look at and think about that. And so that comes back to the unified metadata security and governance piece. If unified metadata security and governance is the thing that makes Hadoop relevant in the cloud, because I want to do Hadoop and Spark and Kafka and all these things together and manage everything that's going on, right? I think that's the big opportunity, and I think it's too early to play out right now whether that's going to take off or not. I hope it does.
Yeah. I also think, though, that the cloud vendors, I mean, it's actually a major challenge to the traditional Hadoop vendors, and not just from, let's say, cloud implementations of Hadoop, whether it be EMR, HDSA, which is Hortonworks, or Google Cloud Dataproc, but also, let's say, all the a la carte, let's say, Spark services, machine learning services. It's that, if I just have this point problem, do I need to stand up a whole entire Hadoop implementation, or if I'm going on the Amazon cloud? Are we going to get into the syndrome of nobody got fired for buying EMR? So I think that is actually a very major threat for the Hadoop vendors. On the other hand, and as what Brian was saying here, where the Hadoop vendors can basically, can differentiate themselves is in the governance, because even though the cloud vendors do have their own security frameworks, I mean, Amazon has its identity and access management, so they have some very robust product there. But when it comes to, let's say, basically, all the areas around like data protection, data lineage, they have not gone there, and that's actually where you folks can really distinguish yourselves.
Right. I mean, the major decision you face is, in my cloud strategy, is Hadoop ephemeral or long running? Do you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure what the initial question was, but so are they threatened? So I guess so one of the things Hortonworks and others, I mean, what things that they can bring are they can bring sort of a multi-cloud, right? A multi-cloud or a hybrid, a different cloud strategy. So, so if you pick one of the cloud vendors, like that's what you got, right? And all the other services with it. So, I mean, there's things, right? So,
Actually, I think that just one general thing, which is that if you're going to a cloud service, are you going to take it through a cloud independent strategy, or are you going to be using their services? If that's
That
the
is the
case,
big
you are
question.
making a platform decision.
there you go.
Yeah.
Great takeaways. We are out of time. Come on down, sir, if there's something else. Thank you very much. I want to thank our analysts. Can we give them a round of applause for their time?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.